Welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of the Enqbator podcast. Coming to you once again from Enqbator's Michigan headquarters in the Business and Tech District of Troy, Michigan. Today, Enqbator President and CEO Sujal Raju provides his insight and expertise on the topic of GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. So let's jump right in and find out more about GDPR and other important security topics affecting today's digital world. All right, well, welcome back, everyone, and welcome to another Enqbator podcast. Today we are here to talk about the important topic of GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. And once again, we're joined by Enqbator President and CEO Sujal Raju. Sujal, welcome back for another podcast episode.
Hi, Dave. Thanks. Good to be back.
Thank you, Sujal. Another important topic to talk about today regarding privacy out there in the website world, GDPR. I'm sure you know quite a bit about this. Again, an important topic out there going around the industry.
Mm-hmm.
For just basic informational purposes, what is GDPR? And I guess, how will it affect website security here in the U.S.?
Yeah, and so GDPR came into force in spring of 2018, and it's a regulation that the European Union imposed on all of the European Union nations. And the main reason for this, and it's actually a welcome for all the consumers or users, really, it's a good news for all of us, even though it puts it taxes a lot of effort for organizations to, abide by these rules and regulations. But basically, it's a way of standardizing all the data protection laws in those European Union nations and protects the personal identifiable information of all the citizens of European nations. So that's what the GDPR, the main reason for that regulation came into picture. Now, how it affects us or the websites in US is that if any of the organizations that through their website collect or hold any information or process any information of the citizens of any of the European nations, they now have to abide by these rules. Even though these organizations are not in European nation, the extent of those laws are actually global. That means that it was created to protect the privacy of the personal identifiable information of all European citizens. So at the heart of it, it protects all the European nation citizens.
Right. Well, that's an excellent point because, like you said, it's a European Union-based regulation.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone needs to worry about it. Everyone with a website needs to worry about it, especially in the healthcare industry, say, with patient information. So, like you said, it does have a big effect on users of patient privacy here in the U.S., not just in, say, the U.K.
That is correct. And if I would like to add on that, obviously at Enqbator we specialize in, helping a wide variety of clients. The majority of them are healthcare and judicial. And so I'll talk about those two. And so in healthcare and judicial, we collect a lot of, if not collect, we also interact with a lot of information about either the users who are patients or may have taken healthcare services at our hospital sites. And so that means that there is a lot of information. And even though we have the HIPAA rules that we all have to abide by, there are certain areas of organizational electronic presence, for example, the websites or mobile apps, things like that, where it's kind of fuzzy, where hey, is this considered personal identifiable information or not, things like that. So that's why it's very important that we do know. And these two organizations, the judicial and healthcare specifically, I said, they do collect this because they have to interact. For example, at judicial, you might be searching for a case that you may be interested in or could be a part of. And so as you interact with the website, what does the website do in terms of protecting that information? Is it holding it in a cookie, things like that. So it does create transparency for users so that they understand how this information is being collected and what they're going to do with it and how they're going to delete or remove that information once there is no more use for that. So that's kind of why it's important. And in healthcare and judicial, like I said, these two organizations are already secure, but I think it complements HIPAA, and it's actually a good reminder for these organizations to make sure that there's other avenues that they might have to take care of.
Right, and like you said, it complements HIPAA. So HIPAA is one standard out there, and this is kind of obviously a new situation, European Union based, but something that would be very, very pivotal for these industries to take advantage of and start getting ahead of right now.
That is correct. So HIPAA obviously was more applicable to healthcare information, but in this case, it encompasses a lot more, and it's basically any personal identifiable information. So there is a long list, and it's important for all these organizations or anyone who is part of managing information, not just developers or not just organizations or vendors that might be involved with creating websites or mobile apps or any kind of app development, but it's also anyone else who could be logging in to these applications and accessing it. They should be aware of what's going on and what they should or should not be doing.
Great information to begin with, Sujal. So from a development strategy, so what strategy and or approach would you recommend for these types of businesses to make sure they're complying with these regulations? That's
a great question, and I know there's a lot of confusion, and not even confusion. I think people think that there's a lot of sophistication that is involved. A lot of organizations are also accessing like, hey, what's the effort that's involved? The thing is, like, you should not tackle it from there, but look at if you don't do it, what happens. The fines are very steep. It could be a couple of $1 million, or even I think 20 million euros if I'm not wrong, and up to 4% of your income if you're a global company. That the income could be a lot more. So I think it's very important that all organizations actually take this seriously and apply this as soon as they can, because the GDPR is already in place and effective since I believe May of 2018. But then here in US as well, California passed a law which is going to take into effect in January of 2020. So that's coming very fast. But like I said, like, these laws are not specific to those specific geographical locations. Mm-hmm. They are applicable to anyone who deals with information of citizens of that state or that European Union. So at Enqbator, we actually recommend a multi-step approach or multi-step implementation strategy, and that involves building awareness first. So you have to create an awareness program for your employees and create, let them, like, educate them to know what exactly is involved, what is considered PII, what is not. And with that, what will happen is they'll understand and probably list out what all applications that they think do qualify for those that need to be taken a look at. The second thing they should be doing is scanning and doing a risk assessment of all their systems. So once you educate, you then scan, whether it could be automated tools or it could be a manual process, but you do a risk assessment and find out. And by the way, this includes third-party vendors too. So it's not just your organization, but if any other, any vendors that are involved in handling your data or providing services to you should also be assessed to find out all those areas where GDPR applies. The second would be, once you have done the risk assessment, you would identify the key areas which need to be changed, or sufficient information is posted so that the consumers know what exactly we are doing with the data that we collect. After that, once you've identified the areas that need to be corrected or modified or enhanced, you then document all of the policies. So you then have to create policies so that your employees or anyone else in the organization knows how exactly you're dealing with the, GDPR and what your policies are in terms of handling the data that you collect and how you process them and how you dismantle them once you're done with that. And once you have created the policies, then you should train your staff. So now you have policies that you can actually ask train them and let your employees know that you're going to enforce them, and what they need to do, what the protocols are that they would need to follow. And once that has happened, then implement those strategies, implement those policies. And finally, once you have done that, it doesn't mean that once you have done it, all is good. I would recommend that the organization also have a scheduled reassessment that they do periodically, maybe once in 6 months, maybe more frequently, or maybe once annually, depending on how complex their processes are. And I think that's a good strategy. At least the first time, it's probably going to take more time, but it's worth doing that effort. And then after that, the subsequent scanning and all that would be a lot more easier.
Right. Well, one thing you just touched on, obviously, the most important element of this whole situation, the consumer. So we talked about how this affects the business and the strategies for that. So what impact might this have on the consumer, and should they be more attentive to how they use websites or mobile applications?
That's a good question. So consumers, this is actually a good news for all of us, right? Because unless these laws are stringent and enforced, it's very unclear, right? For technical and non-technical folks, when you visit a website, you have no idea what information they're collecting, and this is not specific to maybe a form that you might fill in with your information, but as generic as collecting information on which websites you have visited, just placing cookies for that matter, like tracking what you've been doing, all of this. Without these laws, the websites do not have to disclose how they're collecting and how they're using that information, but now they have to let you know what they're doing with your information. So for consumers, I would say obviously know that these laws exist, and you can report them if you find that there is information that is being collected, or you have the right to actually talk to the organization that you are getting services from or interact with, and you can ask them for information on how they handle your data, and you have the right to find out who had access to your data, as well as have the right to say, once your interaction with that organization is complete, you can ask them to actually delete that information, and they have to comply with that. So know that these laws exist, know what your rights are, and then at the same time be alert. Look for these. You're going to see more and more websites and mobile apps when they do track or use your information in any subtle way, or when you fill a form, you have the right to know how they're going to use that form. So you're going to see more information posted on websites and mobile apps saying how they're going to use that. So I'm sure you would have seen those new cookie policy pop-ups that come up. So that's actually one of the things that are required now.
So would it be more, talking about that, obviously, is this for the consumer, just thinking from the consumer side of it, is it going to be more intrusive? More annoying type of pop-ups and things like that come about policies like that? Or should, as a consumer, you kind of welcome those things, welcome those intrusions, knowing that you're going to be more secure?
At first, you might think that they're annoying. I would think because it's different from what you have expected, right? Because when you visit a website, you don't necessarily like to click on OK or things like that, right? But I think understanding that, hey, this is the right thing, and actually the organization that's doing that is actually doing it on your behalf in your best interest. So I think it's a good thing. And maybe there's going to be different ways on how organizations do it. This is fairly new, so we are still evolving in terms of how we can make it as subtle and less annoying for the consumers. But I think it's a joint, collaboration, or I would say joint effort between the consumers and the organizations to accept that these are there to protect information. And it's good for both consumers because they know how their information is being used. There isn't a week or a month that goes by where you haven't heard of a breach somewhere. So So it's actually a good thing that we have that this is coming forward.
Cool. Well, I hear a lot of people, a lot of businesses talking about adopting new cookie policies, like you just mentioned, in regards to these new GDPR regulation.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about that, if you could.
Sure. So cookie policy is like a one subset, right? One thing where the European Union has enforced saying like, hey, when you do not collect information directly, there is some information that you collect indirectly. For example, Google Analytics, where it's tracking, your traffic on the website, and could be creating a cookie so that it understands when you come back to the site, or it could be tracking for their own advertisement purposes or for remarketing in the marketing world, where it's crucial for them to know that, hey, you clicked on a Facebook ad and you then landed on the site. Because they would like to know the return on investment of their ads in Facebook or any such social media sites or other avenues where advertisements are placed. So it is critical for them to do that. So that's nothing wrong in doing that. However, consumer needs to know that they are collecting this information, and they have a choice to whether accept it and allow them to do it, or they can decide to say like, no, I do not allow you to put cookie and do that. So cookies are used for several things. For example, if you're trying to log into a website, it has to place a cookie so that it understands what your session token is, and from there on, understand that as you interact with the site, that it is you who's logged in, right? So that's one way of using cookies. The other is to know the intrusional ones. I would say is the one that knows where all you have been, so that all the different sites that you have been, and traditionally these are cookies placed by organizations that have access to multiple websites where they could be using their services. I'll take an example of Google Analytics cookie, but it's not that Google obviously is abiding by all of these regulations. But I'm just saying, like, because a lot of sites out there use Google Analytics for tracking their websites, Google is in a position to know where all, for example, Dave, I'll take your example. If you have visited 10 sites today, and all of them use Google Analytics, their cookie could identify your traffic on all of those 10 websites and connect the dots and actually know a lot more about your browsing trends and things like that. So these are things that you might not realize that are happening. So the cookie policy is a good thing. Basically, there's different ways or different levels of how an organization could apply that. At the minimum, they should actually let them know how they're using cookies. If they're using it for session management, if they're using it for tracking purposes, if they're using it for marketing, whatever that is, you gotta be transparent about it. Let them know, and at the minimum, allow them to either accept it or disallow. Which means that if they disallow, you need to have a mechanism of how you could not use those, or let the user know to log off the site, right? So that's one thing. And at the other end of the spectrum, I would say, is where you be transparent to them in terms of how you're using cookies and display options so that they have the ability to turn on and off the different types of cookies that you have. So you're letting them decide what types of cookies you want or not. Because the other way that I had talked about just now, if you disallow, you're basically letting them not even log into the site, right? Because without cookies, you can't track that the user is logged in. And so that's why that first option is not probably applicable to all of, even though that's the easiest way. But I think that's not the best way for organizations that have a lot of online interactive apps. Coming back to the second option, or the other end of the spectrum, the best option is where for each cookie that you or any third-party applications on your site could be creating and storing information in, you make that transparent and let the users decide which cookies to accept or reject, and then based on that, you just throughout that session, have that those cookies that they have disallowed removed from their browsing experience.
Well, recapping, obviously GDPR, it's a very, very important topic.
Yes.
And some great thoughts there. Any last thoughts on why businesses should be paying more attention right now?
I would say organizations should not wait where this becomes a strict regulation or wait for until a fine is imposed. Right now, you have a lot of time, and even though this is already in place, so I think we have less time. But I think sooner the organizations can jump on it, it's probably better for them. And like I said, it's good for everyone. It's not like this is a regulation that organizations all of a sudden now have to spend a lot of money or budget for this. But it's actually a good thing. It actually will help everyone, us as consumers as well as organizations, to better handle information and process them, and help have a safe internet for all of us.
Sujal, as always, great information for both the business and the consumer. Thanks again for your time.
Pleasure to be here, Dave. I appreciate the time, and I hope it was a knowledgeable session of knowing what GDPR is. And as always, you could contact us at Enqbator.com for any questions, or if we could help assess any information for you.